Oh boy, I'm about to poke the hornet's nest with this video. What's up, guys? Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about what is sure to be a very controversial subject. I know it is. I see lots of people complaining about it online, which is this question of psychedelic therapy and why it is so fucking expensive. I'd love to provide you some different perspectives, some different angles based on what I've learned, based on what I've experienced, based on my trainings, and just kind of help to give you a little bit of understanding about why it's so expensive. Okay, let's talk about it. Before we go ahead and dive into really unpacking this here, I want to just say a couple kind of caveats up front here. First of all, I realize this is a very charged topic for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that there are a lot of people out there right now, a lot of people out there who need really quality care and support. And just in general, in our society, we don't have the amount of care and support that we need out there. I'm really sensitive to that fact, and I have a lot of compassion for it. I'm really aware of it. And just, to kind of make it a little personal here, part of the reason that I've learned all the stuff I've learned here and a lot of what I'm sharing with you, a lot of this comes out of me having to learn how to self-heal because I couldn't afford proper therapy when I needed it. So I totally get it. Also, I realize that this just ties into kind of a collective wound that a lot of us have around money and around shitty economic systems and around exploitation of people's, vulnerabilities and victimhood. And that, of course, can tie into very personal things from our own past. I get it. So please know that just because I will be talking about this topic, that I'm not dismissive of any of that, that I do care, that I understand it can be really rough and that can be a lot of emotions. So my request here is if you get really upset about this topic in general, please do a favor and don't just vent at me in the comments section. Don't be a jerk about it. Try to be an adult. Try to have a constructive conversation. If there's something I say that you take issue with or that you disagree with, I'm happy to hold space for a nice wide spectrum of perspectives and opinions here on the channel, but I'm not going to do personal attacks or judgment or aggression as venting. I'm not here to be a punching bag for you. So that's kind of my boundary, but within reason, if you have some point or angle or thing you'd like to share, I certainly will be reading the comments and care. Let me see what else is there to say before we go ahead and get into it. This is also going to be a changing landscape in the near future, all things going the way we expect them to here in the States. Certainly in Australia, things are changing. Looks like things are changing in Canada, parts of Europe rapidly. So, I'm making this in early 2023, but who knows what the landscape of cost for psychedelic therapy is going to look like even within a couple of years here. So this may be irrelevant really quickly. Let me see. I think that's all I have to say for now in terms of giving context to this. I'm sure I'll add more as we go through the video here, but I'd like to just start to give you some of my perspectives, some of the things I've learned from my mentors, from my teachers, from my trainings, from what I do as a coach, what I've learned and what I've discovered, to try to give you a little bit of context around this. I want to say I'm sensitive to anyone who can't afford it, who is frustrated about that or angry about that. And I'm not trying to just advocate for high prices, but I do want to kind of just elucidate it, make it more clear, because I get from the outside, you're like, oh, psychedelic therapy sounds awesome. I'm all in. Then you start to go and research, the options. And you start to read about these prices and it can be really expensive and that can be super disheartening. I get it. So without much further ado, let's go ahead and start to just unpack some of the different reasons why psychedelic therapy can end up being so expensive. So before we start talking money and, hours and price points and numbers and all that, I want to just kind of start this conversation off with you guys, talking about what the standards in the therapy world are in general. Right? Like what you can kind of expect, when you look to a therapist, in terms of what you can pay. Now, obviously, depending on the therapist and the type of therapy and whether or not you have insurance, you may be able to get this covered under insurance. You may have a lower copay. So for a lot of you, therapy can be manageable in terms of price. But I wanted to just kind of lay out some of what I see and what I know and what I hear talking with my peers about different approaches to therapy and kind of rates, so that we have an understanding of the territory of therapy in general. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but let's just kind of go through it here. So generally speaking, for a decent therapist, decent to really good, depending on the city you live in, depending on their specialization, depending on how intensive the work is that needs to be done, how much time, you're really generally looking at something like 125 to maybe $250 or more, depending on, again, on the therapist and their clientele per hour, right? And in therapy, that's generally going to be a 50-minute hour, right? So that's not even a full hour. Good therapists, I think it's really important to say up front and for you to understand, unfortunately, are really rare and in really high demand. So I've looked at some of the statistics around just in general, the amount of therapists here in the US where I live. And it's not good. We already, just in terms of total number of therapists out there, have a very low number of therapists. I think, we don't even have one for every county in the United States. I think, a lot of times, it's like thousands and thousands of people for every one therapist around. Like we massively lack just therapists in general. Okay. Now that's before, and that's talking bottom of the barrel, basic, just there's a therapist there, someone, a counselor, someone you can talk to, right? Then we start to filter for quality or skill set or depth of training, these kinds of things, amount of experience. And that number shrinks and gets smaller and smaller. Unfortunately, and I hate to even say this, when we start to filter out, abusive therapists, poorly attuned therapists, therapists who are doing sketchy things on the side, that number gets even smaller still. So I hate to say this, I really do, but I want you to understand the reality of the situation is that in general, the population of skilled therapists as a whole, right, is pretty small. Right. And this is part of why rates are so expensive, in addition to some of the other things we'll talk about here along the way, like, the amount of wear and tear, et cetera, right? So good therapists are in high demand. There's not that many of them. There's a lot of training and a lot of continuing to train to get better and better that goes into being a good therapist. Right. And in addition to this, so that's just therapy in general. In addition to this, when we're looking at psychedelic therapy in specific, there's obviously a lot of different models of it, but a very common one that's emerging, especially for MDMA therapy, is having two therapists in the room, right? So this already starts to, when you're talking about a high hourly rate like that, and then you're talking about, the amount of time and attention and the need for two therapists in the room, this already starts to imply that it's probably going to be expensive. Okay. So I want to just kind of lay that out again as a common shared understanding here that good therapy usually, there's not that many therapists and they're going to be charging, 125 kind of at the low end. If you see a therapist for less than that, they're either new, they aren't that well trained, they don't know their skill set that well, or they don't believe in their work or something like that. So please know this off the bat. Okay, so from here, let's start to talk a bit about some of the different factors that can really start to bump this price up and how we end up at these crazy prices, okay? So one of the biggest factors here in terms of psychedelic therapy and why it's so expensive is just sheer time that goes into each session or each client. So I want to kind of break this down for you. And again, this is going to really vary a lot depending on the psychedelic therapist, the school that they're trained in, where they come from, how skilled they are, how complex your issue or problem is. And again, let's just kind of remember that a lot of times you don't even know what it is that you need to unpack and heal until you start to work with somebody. And so there can be stuff that emerges along the way that, kind of implies needing more time spent on the issue to really get you to where you want to be. So if we're just looking at time here, I want you to consider that at least in what I've been trained in and what I'm being showed here, for a new client, where it's the first journey with this client and you've got to, get everything set up and get everything ready to go. It's not uncommon for that to be 20 to 30 hours worth of work for one session, for one journey. Okay. So you might hear that and go, what? That's insane. But let me break this down a little bit for you, because when I first heard that, I was like, holy shit, that's crazy. But the more I look at it, that's about right. So if you're talking a new person and you're working with a new therapist and it's a new relationship together, you've never done a journey before, you don't know each other, you don't necessarily know what the issue is you're working on. First of all, the intake process alone, in the model that I'm starting to be trained in here, just the intake of as a guide, going through and understanding this person and the different aspects of their life and the different aspects of their history, and unpacking all the different things and trying to maybe start to get a track on where their challenges are, what their issues are, what the core themes that come up across different areas of their life are that really maybe need some extra attention or some sensitivity to. That alone, that intake process alone, can take 5 or 6 hours. Okay. Now, again, if you're looking at a regular therapist at the low end, let's lowball it. I said the low end was 125, but let's lowball it and call it $100. You're already looking at $600 just for them to do an intake with you, right? Just so that they know, this is like just getting the lay of the land of your experience and really unpacking everything that you've been through, because you are a whole person, you're a whole system with a whole history. And all of that is game for what can come up in a psychedelic therapy session, right? So it's important for the guide or the therapist or whoever to really have a well-rounded intake here and really understand all the different factors of what you're dealing with as a person. So that alone can be 5 or 6 hours. Then a lot of times, there's a need for therapy that comes up just from talking about intake, and doing the prep, right? So there might be a need for 4 hours of therapy doing prep. There might be need for another 4 hours there of doing, so there might be a need for like 4 hours, like a couple sessions of doing just therapy, like helping you to get like into a good spot. And then there might be another, session or few sessions of prep work of getting you really ready in terms of setting an intention, of helping you prepare and know what to expect, know how to navigate this space and the experience so that you're having the best experience possible. All of that, right? So you're looking at maybe up to like 8 hours, again, before, you do the journey. So that's already, you're looking at somewhere like 14 hours before you even do the journey, give or take. Then you do the journey, right? And the journey itself is, if the therapist is, some do by the day, some do by the hour, but let's call it 7 hours, give or take, for a psilocybin experience, right? Including maybe some setup and some holding, doing the journey and then, kind of wrapping it up afterwards. And 7 might be cutting it short, might be generous. It depends on the experience. But again, that's 7 hours, which if we're lowballing, that's another $700 for the journey. A lot of people are charging, $1,000, $1,500 or more just for the journey day, right? Then there is, however many hours of therapy, of integration and support and work on the back end, and that might be another 4 sessions on the back end, again, another 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours to kind of help support you and integrate that and turn that into something that really sticks and settles well in your nervous system. So it's really easy to end up at somewhere between 20 to 30 hours. And again, if you ballpark that out, lowballing at like, at $100 an hour, which is kind of a therapist rate, you're kind of looking at, that ballpark of $2,000 to $3,000 already just for that one session, just for that one journey, right? And all the kind of support work around that. So that starts to make sense how just in terms of time investment, you can end up with these really expensive kind of experiences. Again, some guides, some therapists, and guides and therapists are different and have different levels of skill. So there's that. Some charge less. Some might charge $700 for the day, or $600 for the day, or $800 for the day, something like that. That seems a little more reasonable, relatively speaking. But generally speaking, there's a lot of work and a lot of time that if you're really setting up a proper experience and you're really doing good therapeutic work and a proper intake and good support on the other end, it's really easy for that to turn into a lot of hours. So this is the first thing I would kind of offer to you as consideration for why it could be so expensive. It's more hours than you think. It's not just, hey, I'm going to go over to this therapist's office and, eat some mushrooms and, lay on their couch and, work on stuff and that's it. There's a lot more that goes into it to really create that safe container of rapport and connection and trust and real support for you. So that's one reason. Let's talk about more. Okay, so the next reason why prices might be expensive is the amount of responsibility that's involved with really properly supporting a person when it comes to psychedelic experience. So you may feel like this is a bit of a cop-out here. I'll just kind of make my points here. Feel free to disagree, obviously, but and the reason I say that is because obviously if you've ever done a recreational thing, I'm sure it's very possible to have done it in a very loose, casual, less responsible kind of situation, and maybe it worked out fine for you. Or, maybe you, had a trip sitter and their level of responsibility with you was relatively low, but you had good experiences, you felt supported, and it was positive. So I can understand why this particular perspective on things may not settle well for someone who's had a lot of good experiences. But responsibility is a huge piece of this. It's really possible, obviously, for a journey to really go sideways. Or, even if it doesn't go sideways per se, it's really possible for there to be, a huge traumatic release or a huge amount of confusion on the part of the journeyer in terms of what's going on, and they get uncomfortable or squirrely or overwhelmed, and it really takes a lot of tending to and a lot of support and a lot of care. There can be, a lot of vulnerability, quite frankly, between both sides, not just the tripper side, the journeyer client side, but also on the side of the guide or the therapist, because let's face it, psychedelic therapy in most places is still illegal. And there can be, there's a lot of implications there in terms of, can we trust each other for the journey, in terms of, can I open up and let go and be vulnerable and fall apart and cry and, have my experience and have that be okay and not be shamed or judged or, any of that. But also for the guide or the person holding the container, it's like, can I trust this person to go through such an extreme experience and be, cool and be graceful and not, use this as some, fuel for their trauma to react to and project upon. Are they someone I can trust, with myself? And I think that, in a certain respect, the high dollar amount kind of reflects that and can be a way of saying, hey, I want to know you're really all in on this. I want to know you really mean it. I want to know that you're committed to this process. I want to know that you're not going to just kind of, treat it willy-nilly or throw me under the bus if something was uncomfortable for you. And it's kind of like, it's a kind of a way of testing, like, are you, bullshitting through this process, or do you really mean it? And whether or not you agree with that approach, I know that there are a lot of therapists who run their business that way, and coaches too, and guides, and who run their business that way, who really do look at that dollar amount as kind of like a level of commitment and buy-in. And I get it. it makes a certain amount of sense to me. So that could be another reason why the price could be high, along with the time investment, is the level of support and responsibility and accountability and a desire to know that that same level of commitment and leaning in is also happening on the client side. So that's that. I'll let you make of that what you will. Let's pivot and talk about just skill. Again, like I was saying previously, if you're someone who's had a lot of positive psychedelic experiences and generally doesn't need a lot of extra support in order to have a positive experience, this might sound a little strange to you. Why would this matter? But believe it or not, psychedelic therapy is actually a high level of skill that's required on the part of the guide or the therapist or whoever's supporting you in order for it to really, really, really be done well. At that high level of skill, there are amazing things that can happen, amazing healings and transformations and breakthroughs, and it can be organized in such a profoundly beautiful way that delivers incredible results. And I really do think that the people who are highly skilled in this field do work that is nothing short of magical. It's incredible what can be done with this. It is an art form in and of itself. But all of that kind of aside, if we're just talking training, the amount of hours that go into becoming a licensed therapist, let alone a good licensed therapist, let alone then getting trained in psychedelic therapy, logging hours, taking the substances yourself, that's a lot of, skill to develop and learn to become kind of up and running and fluent with this. There's also a lot of nuance to this skill. There's a lot of needing to pay subtle attention to people and their experience because they may be having a really powerful experience internally, but what they're presenting externally may be very subtle, right? And there's a lot of needing to be able to track that, to be really engaged and aware. It's not like the therapist is just sitting over in the corner, reading a book, waiting for you to, pop out the other side of your journey and how was it? That's not it. There's like presence with every moment. There's a lot of attunement. There's a lot of holding space for the person, including having a positive intention towards the person, no matter what they're moving through, really being connected, supporting them with what they need in terms of water or, helping them get up, go to the bathroom or, opening a window, making the environment continue to be comfortable. And then in terms of proper feedback and interaction that's healing and supportive to the person as they're moving through this emergent unfolding of whatever it is that they're working with and healing. So it requires a lot of sensitivity and attunement and attention that, quite frankly, your average person, I think, is capable of, but is under-trained in. And this is kind of one of the things that separates out like a good therapist or a good coach or, a good medicine person is their level of like absolute awareness and attention of what's happening with you to as much of a degree as they can possibly muster without projecting all their stuff onto you by simply just being present with what's coming up for you. That's a skill, and that's a difficult skill that actually takes a lot of time to train and then a lot of energy to continue to muster. And so, that is a high value, highly honed thing. The other thing I kind of want to add in here in terms of talking about skill and how this is a high value skill here, my concern, I'll be honest with you, I'll level with you here. We'll be talking towards the end of the video about options and how there will be low cost options because I want to give you a little hope. I do think there's going to be options for people who need affordable psychedelic therapy. My concern, though, is that to really do this work properly, if we're talking trauma healing, if we're talking, deep transformation, deep support, spiritual awakenings that can be like profound, really shedding old conditioning patterns and having a big breakthrough, that kind of stuff, I really feel like requires more of a one-on-one type connection. That's the kind of stuff that I don't see how that quality of work can really be rendered at scale in group sessions. This is for me one of the areas where I tend to diverge from like a lot of the, group ceremony centers that you'll see in Central and South America, or even some of the models I've seen over in Europe. I respect group work. It has its own power to it. I think it has its own advantages to it. But I think in terms of like, if you really need that deeply connective, attuned work, it's hard to get that in a group setting to the degree that you might need it. But when you're working one-on-one with a therapist, or two-on-one, two therapists and you, that kind of a situation, that's more where you're going to get that really refined, highly attuned, highly skilled kind of work. And I think that's going to require more money, because you're essentially eating up one or two therapists or coaches or guides' time for 7 hours, 8 hours, 6 hours, whatever it might be, that they're not running with other clients, where they're highly engaged with you and really bringing it, right? And so, again, some people will say that's not worth the money, or that doesn't mean that, it should cost as much as it does. But I think that that's another valid explanation for why it can be so expensive. So another reason would be skill. Okay, another reason why these sessions can be so expensive that I think is often not considered when you're just kind of looking at like, I want to do the psychedelic therapy, I want to do the thing and have the healing now, is forgetting, a lot of people forget the bigger picture of healing it and of change. Let's say you have a really good session and you have an amazing transformative healing thing that pops the bubble of some persistent issue in your life that's been holding you back, or causing you a lot of emotional distress, or impacting how you show up in life for those around you, et cetera, et cetera. If you really have a good healing, one thing that we often don't think about that's really important to consider and factor in here is, what are the repercussions that ripple out through your life, over time, right? How much more capable and functional will you be, with this issue resolved? How does that impact the way you live your life, the amount of money you can make, the career you get into, the quality of relationships you have with people? When you're healed and healthy, how does that improve your, baseline level of happiness? How does that, impact the way you show up, for your family? How does that impact the way that you show up for your best friends? How does that impact the way that, you're able to, give back to the world yourself in your own way? There's so much, that can ripple out. I've heard so many stories of people, and I see this all the time just in my hypnosis work with people, where someone comes for one issue and heals one thing, and then a whole other area of their life also improves as that heals. They go to deal with an anxiety issue and their health improves, for example, or their motivation improves, or et cetera, right? And so I do think that has value of some sort. I don't know how we can, fairly quantify that. But if you go in for a psychedelic therapy session and you have a big breakthrough, and that ripples out across your life, and you not only get like the relief that you want in whatever area, but you're, more engaged in other areas of your life, and you're able to make more money, and you're able to like stay more focused, and you're able to take more enjoyment out of other areas of your life, or your health improves or something like that. Does that translate to something monetarily for you, where that's kind of worth a little more money? I think that's a really reasonable question to ask and consider. Again, I don't want to, rationalize this away for people who really struggle financially, because again, I get it. And I don't want to be dismissive of that. And I don't want to, just kind of over justify here. But I think there's a truth in that if you have a ripple effect of some healing, and you're trying to quantify, what is that healing worth in your life in the bigger picture over time across multiple different areas of your life. For me, in the healings I've had, in the therapy I've had, in the personal development seminars I've had, that's ended up being worth it in the bigger picture. So I'll just leave it there. You may or may not agree with me. That's fine. But I think this is another reason why it can be so expensive. Okay, another reason why it might be expensive, and hopefully I'm not just kind of being overly redundant or annoying here. I do feel sensitive to you as an audience about this topic. I do respect that it can be a highly charged topic for people. Another reason why it might be expensive is just quite simply the results you can get when you have someone supporting you who's really trained at what they do can be so much more than what you can get on your own. Now, I've seen a lot of comments in different threads of people talking about this. I did a bunch of journeys by myself, and I did one with a guide, and it was by far the most impactful. This is a very common thing that people report. And I think there are a lot of things to consider inside of this kind of angle on the conversation here. For example, if you have someone guiding you, or who is a therapist, or just really tuned in, or a medicine person, or a guide, or what have you, they may be able to catch blind spots for you that you don't see in the way that you're thinking about your issue. They may be able to bring up angles and perspectives on what it is that you're working through that's both supportive in ways that you're not supporting yourself, so affirmative of you in ways that you're not affirming yourself, which can be really healing. They can also kind of catch things that maybe you're dismissing or bypassing or rationalizing, that they're like, hey, what about that? And really tune you into a whole piece that can really, catalyze your healing in a way that perhaps left to your own devices, you might tend to kind of ignore or bypass, or I don't want to look at that thing, that kind of a thing. And that can lead to much bigger results. Another time, another angle on this also is if we're talking trauma healing, particularly like attachment trauma healing here, a lot of times, I hate to say this because I really don't believe in monetized safe connection. Like we should all have safe connection in our lives, to the point that, quite frankly, we don't need, a trauma therapist. That's truly how I see the world. We should all have safe connection. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't, or we didn't, and we end up with a relational attachment trauma wounding from the way we were raised or our life experiences. And what we need in those situations is really attuned, safe relating as a new template for relationships that counteracts maybe all the shitty people we've had in our lives and all the shitty experiences we've had in our lives. And so this is another thing that's intense work. And it really, if you have the right person who you really click with, and they're able to really meet you in the places where you need to be met to help you start to repattern and reimprint that stuff, it can go a very long way in your nervous system over time and generate really big results by helping you have that relational thing happening in a really positive, healing, safe way that might be outside of your normal conception of relating. I hope this makes sense. And so, again, the results that can come from that are huge. And that takes a really stable, healthy person in themselves to be able to relate to you from a stable, healthy place and stay attuned with you to support you in that process. And so this is another reason why it could be really expensive, is just the results you can get when you have the right person and the right situation are just bigger and deeper and have longer lasting repercussions in your life, and might require a quality of attention and relation that, if you're just eating psychedelics with your buddies, they may not have that skill set. They may not have that capability. Again, it bums me out to say that. I don't like saying that. I wish everyone knew how to relate in a more secure fashion, and we had much less insecure, attachment wounding stuff happening. But that's kind of, if I'm being honest with you, part of the lay of the land here is that, those attuned people like that are rare and can make all the difference if you're healing relational trauma. So that would be another reason. Okay, so hopefully you don't hate me by this point in the video, and you don't think that I'm just absolutely being a shill for high-end, expensive, bougie psychedelic therapy. And I'm not just, being dismissive of you and the unfairness of this. Hopefully I've treated this with respect and with a certain amount of honesty and forthrightness and clarity here. But in case you feel a bit demoralized or a bit kind of like burned about this, I want to give you a little hope here, and I want to offer some of my thoughts about some of the options here. So I do think, obviously it's 2023. We are right on the cusp of all things going right, fingers crossed, knock on wood here, all things going right, that, the MAPS MDMA trials will have passed and succeeded and will be greenlit by the FDA, and then, they'll go through their process with the DEA, and it'll get rescheduled, and it'll become legal, and it'll become a thing, hopefully this year, or within the next 12 months, let's say. So, this could all change. I do think I've seen a lot, and I've heard a lot of talk about group healing sessions. So my thoughts on that. I just said earlier in the video here, I don't think it's optimal for some people who need like a high degree of attunement. But for some of us, group healing can be a really viable option that kind of helps us get us in the door, creates a sense of community and bonding with other people, and can be effective. I don't want to pretend like it can't be effective. It can be healing in its own right. I think there are some great models that are being kind of laid out for that. And so that will be an option. And I imagine that's going to be much more cost effective. Another kind of like ray of sunshine here that I want to give you in terms of hope. When it comes to MDMA, I don't know if you know this, but MDMA is a generic. It can't be patented by a big pharma company, which means that if it becomes legalized, it will become highly affordable for most of us, right? So I don't know how much red tape there will be around getting prescriptions from a doctor and what that'll entail, and that may be difficult. But if you are able to get the prescription, I think the actual cost of the medicine itself will be really reasonable. And I've heard Rick Doblin say as much. So I know this isn't just me kind of, theorizing on this. This has always been the intention of MAPS, is to get MDMA and MDMA therapy out to people at broad scale at an affordable rate. So I think we'll see more of that kind of, these kinds of support structures start to show up to make it possible. The other thing I want to say here, I don't mean to be offensive, but I do think it's another option here, is that if you're really motivated to figure this out for yourself, it is possible. The information is out there online to learn how to heal yourself, how to do self-directed therapy, how to work with medicine, towards that end. So I would be remiss to not say that, and again, I don't want to be dismissive. I get it. Some people don't have the time, don't have the attention, to really absorb all that information and practice and learn how to do it. And I'm a DIYer in this area, so I have a bias. Okay, so I want to own all of that with you guys. But let's be honest, you can learn. And there are major benefits to learning in my experience. Not only that, obviously I can't talk about sourcing psychedelics on a YouTube channel here, but people figure it out. There are ways to figure that out. And so, if you're really highly motivated to do that, and that's going to generally be more cost effective, because the information online is free, or books are generally affordable. You get a few books, you start to read, you start to talk with other people about how they're doing the work, and you can start to piece together a bit of a game plan here. So that is another way that this can go. That's already available. There are already people doing it. And so that might be another option for you. So I do want to put that out too as another option. So I do think there will be cost-effective options. And I think what we'll end up seeing probably is something like really a scale, not unlike what we already see with non-psychedelic, with standard therapy, where, there are state-supported free levels of therapy that are available to people, or really, low cost if you're going to like, certain counselors and universities or what have you, all the way up to obviously there's super high-end therapists out there who only work with rich and famous people. and charge an insane rate. I'm sure, not that he's a therapist, but I'm sure Tony Robbins' day rate is insanely expensive at the high end, right? So there's a range that's going to be there, probably in the psychedelic therapy world as well. And so my message to you, hopefully, is don't get too disheartened if you can't afford it. Legalization for MDMA in the States is right around the corner. If you can afford to travel, obviously there's access in other countries already, so that's also an option. And I guess what I'd recommend if you're kind of looking down any of those roads is to start to, really be choosy and learn enough about therapy that you know how to identify, crappy from good support. Because I do feel strongly that everyone deserves really good, competent support. So that's kind of my thoughts on why it's so expensive. I understand that it is. I understand that that's kind of a bit of a black pill for a lot of people out there. And I hope I've given you a little clarity as to why maybe it's expensive, and perhaps hopefully even a little bit of hope of some of the options that are kind of opening up, upon the horizon here shortly. I'm happy to talk about this more. If you have any questions about it, any disagreements, any talking points like that, please do feel free to leave them down below in the comments section. I always appreciate a good dialogue. And truly, I'm thinking of all of you with just great love and great appreciation. I hope you're doing well out there. If you have any questions, if you would like to pick my brain, feel free to email me. I'm generally pretty available to people. I'm a big believer in supporting people as much as I can for free. If you'd like to work with me around, getting some hypnosis, some coaching, some help with prep or integration work, anything like that, of course, feel free to get in touch with me as well. And that's it for now. Much love to you all. Take care.